Pokedex entry 112, Rhydon, the drill Pokemon. Everyone's favorite stumpy rhinoceros from the first generation of Pokemon. Looking back, Rhydon was certainly a powerhouse Pokemon who packed a punch and could take a hit. A ground type who bordered on pseudo-legendary stats and relevancy. Though at times we may look back on Rhydon with nostalgia glasses on, we shouldn't let that blind us, because sadly time does go on, and no matter how hard we try, things eventually do change, especially first generation Pokemon. So in this video, we'll be examining Rhydon without our preconceptions, revealing its true history and development as a Pokemon. Hopefully at the end, we don't get one-shot KO'd. Get it? 'Cause Rhydon has horn drill? Don't drill me on that joke. Rhydon started its journey, as we've said, all the way back in Gen 1, a much simpler time when the game from a competitive standpoint was basically just a dance between status effects. Rhydon's typing of ground and rock was enough to put it on people's radars in and of itself. This Pokemon was grounded to electric moves, which were prevalent in the meta at the time thanks to the overwhelming importance of paralysis. Like I said, Gen 1 was all about them status effects though, and paralysis was a big one. A paralyzed Pokemon is a slow Pokemon, and speed is often the determining factor of a win, not to mention the 25% chance your opponent won't be able to do, well, anything, which is of course devastating. While moves like Stun Spore and Body Slam were sources of spreading paralysis back in Gen 1, the more common method came off the back of electric type moves like Thunder, Thunderbolt, and especially Thunder Wave, which specifically paralyzes the Pokemon it's used on. This was one of the reasons why Rhydon was highly regarded in teams back in the day. These electric paralyzed checks had no effect, which meant it was the perfect choice to switch in against something like Zapdos, for example. Zapdos has strong stats and a stab and drill peck, but with its electric special moves having no impact, and drill peck not finding luck against its rock typing and high defensive stats, Rhydon could always force a switch. Outside of countering electric and flying types, Rhydon's stats and moves made it a powerful late game threat if it came into an opponent already riddled with status effects. Its defensive stat often allowed it to take an explosion or hyper beam to the horn, giving it the all too rare opportunity to actually see a Pokemon recharge after a hyper beam. Back in Gen 1, if hyper beamed KO'd a Pokemon, the user wouldn't have to recharge. I know, broken as hell. After taking it on the chin, you could counter with powerful physical moves like Earthquake, one of the strongest of that type in the game, and pretty much just go to town on your opponent. Of course, in Gen 1, it wasn't all rainbows and rare candies for Rhydon. They thankfully gave this Pokemon some drawbacks, namely its speed and special stat. Remember, back in Gen 1, special attack and defense were a single stat, which meant Rhydon was bad at both. At a bottom-heavy 40 speed base stat, there wasn't really much slower out there, meaning you were really gonna rely on its health and defense. Unfortunately, with its special just marginally better than its speed, any type advantage special move would likely result in a one-hit KO. Speaking of type disadvantages, Rhydon has plenty of them. Being rock and ground, Rhydon took super effective damage from grass, ground, fighting, water, and ice for Generation 1. That's a lot of potential death. So, in all for Generation 1, Rhydon was basically a super armored tank equipped with powerful cannons that was so heavy it moved at a near glacial pace. Nothing was getting through it, and if the opponent was asleep or paralyzed, it could actually hit something first. But despite these advantages, a single drop of water or a leaf blowing by rendered it utterly compromised. Of course, Rhydon continued to be developed and worked on as the games progressed, now entering the second generation of Gold and Silver. Though Gen 2 saw the change of the special stat, splitting them up between special defense and special attack. Rhydon didn't benefit from it, with both of these new stats being the same minuscule 45 base as they were in Red, Blue, and Yellow. Basically, from a statistical and typing standpoint, Rhydon really didn't see a whole lot of change. But there are some differences in playing Rhydon Gen 1 when compared to the style of Gen 2. One of its biggest new tools from Gold and Silver was the move Roar, which in Gen 1 literally did nothing in a battle with another player. In Generation 2, however, it forced a switch into a random Pokemon from your opponent. This coupled well with another new mechanic of the game, Spikes, which damaged Pokemon as they came in. Roar was also a priority move, which really helped a Pokemon as slow as Rhydon. Rhydon also made use of the move Curse, which cut its speed in exchange for a boost of attack and defense. I mean, its speed's already so low, why not, right? Roar and Curse were a great 1-2 punch in that it made the speed stat meaningless when fighting Rhydon. Of course, Gold and Silver also brought a number of downsides to Rhydon's table, namely the introduction of the Steel type, which added yet another new weakness. Pokemon like Skarmory were a plague to Rhydons back in Gen 2. A Pokemon with a type advantage and the ability to be an overall better wall than Rhydon? Yeah, that certainly hurt its numbers. What Rhydon had going for it, however, was its strength. It may not have been the most sturdy of walls thanks to its typing and low special defense, but it could still deal heavy damage. Just like back in Gen 1, Rhydon would continue to thrive on a team hell-bent on inflicting status effects, giving it and the rest of your team advantages that would eventually lead to sweeps. With Ruby and Sapphire, Rhydon again saw slight changes, but nowhere near those in Gold and Silver. Sure, the tried and true combo of Curse and Roar existed, but in Gen 3, a lot of people saw the potential in other moves that fit well with Rhydon's unique playstyle. Rhydon in Gen 3, as is basically true with the previous generations, was more of a tactical Pokemon than a straight up wall or sweeper. It was strong with good moves and health, but its speed and low special defense always left a lot to be desired. You can't switch to Rhydon looking for a sweep without first setting it up well in advance. And if your opponent was at least playing with the processing power of a coconut, they could easily take your Rhydon down with essentially any special attack move. This meant that Rhydon in Gen 3 was corralled into a more hit-and-run style of play. Rhydons in Gen 3 made use of a brand new item, Choice Band, which raised its attack by 50% but locked it into whatever move it used last. Usually that's not a great thing, especially in a game where switching out by your opponent could leave you stuck in a bad situation. That's why you had to play very smart with Rhydon. If you couldn't 1 or 2 shot a Pokemon with whatever move you used, well then you probably shouldn't use it. Luckily, its high attack stat meant it was a viable choice against big bulky Pokemon, which unfortunately in Gen 3 were water types like Swampert. Yet, if Rhydon comes into a Pokemon who is paralyzed, even if it is Swampert, it has the ability to 2-shot it with Choice Band. Still slow, still weak defensively, Rhydon in Gen 3 used its power and smart play to stay somewhat relevant even in a time when new counters were killing the meta. However, that would all change in Generation 4, Diamond and Pearl, as Rhydon would be pretty much shelved for good. Up till this point, Rhydon had been a reliable standby for most teams, finding a way to meek out relevancy in one way or another. But here, nope, it's gone, but this Pokemon's legacy will go on to do even greater things in Generation 4. Yeah, I know I'm making it sound like a funeral, but it's not like that. Rhydon may have missed the boat in Diamond and Pearl, but that's only because it was given a new stage of evolution. Meet Rhydon 2.0, the new, improved, and more comically looking Rhyperior. Gaining this new stage is the most exciting thing to happen to Rhydon in its entire journey through Pokemon history. For years, we all knew what we were getting with Rhydon, and Rhyperior threw all that upside down and gave us something completely new to play with. Being a later stage evolution, Rhyperior, living up to its superior sounding name, of course gave Rhydon a huge jump in base stats. HP, attack, defense, and even special attack and defense all went up a bit, with speed still not being its strong point. Now, don't go getting me wrong here, its special A and D didn't go up a lot, but Rhyperior's still its father's son? Is that how that saying works? Anyway, you get the gist. It didn't magically turn Rhydon into something that can take a hydro pump to the face and live. In that, Rhyperior really played in Gen 4 as a bulky big man with a bunch of health and really devastating attacks. It could be used to sweep teams later in the game like previous gens when your opponent is bogged down by statuses, but mainly it was used to check physical attacking Pokemon, force switches, take some physical hits, and lay down the all-important stealth rocks. It still had the amazing stab and earthquake along with the more defensively minded substitute, which was included in movesets in all the previous games as well. Though Rhydon got a new evolution, that wasn't a one-all fix to all its previous issues left to balance this Pokemon. Rhyperior went on to do poorly against other bulky and wall Pokemon, unable to KO them in a single move. Many of these Pokemon used were water or grass types, like Blastoise, who could easily turn the tables and end Rhyperior in a single special water attack. Its weaknesses are still glaring. Its 4 times weaknesses were super relevant, and despite its high HP, could still easily be taken down by some super effective physical moves. Now this was made a little better with Rhyperior's ability, Solid Rock, which reduced the damage of super effective moves by 25%, giving this Pokemon a chance in some matchups. But really, if we're all being honest, its playstyle never really changed. Despite this new and improved form, Rhyperior in Gen 4 would go on to be an attacking threat meant to scare your opponents into predictable switches and punishing them for it. Its health and bulkiness allowed it to take a few hits and deal a devastating blow in return, but if you tried to use it as a wall or tank in your team, well, you were gonna have a rough time. It's pretty much like a paper tank. While most of us probably thought the days of Rhydon to be over with the advent of Rhyperior, the superior Rhydon, this actually turned out to not be completely true. In Gen 5, Black and White introduced a held item which really impacted the game a lot, an item called Eviolite. This item, when given to hold by a Pokemon that's not reached its final stage of evolution yet, gives the Pokemon a boosted 50% buff to their defense and special defense stats. But remember, this buff is only available to non-fully evolved Pokemon, or else it would be completely broken and overused. And I think you can tell where I'm taking this point. With the Eviolite, Rhydon's base defense rose from 120 to a mind-blowing 180, giving it more base defense than Rhyperior. It also came with the added bonus of upping its special defense, but it was more minute, meaning even the slightest special move could still one-hit Rhydon. But that defense, boy, was no joke. And for people who were using or wanted to use Rhydon as a tanky Pokemon, Eviolite was the perfect addition. The up defensive stat meant that Rhydon, now more than ever, could take those super effective physical moves and be left standing, something that wasn't really the case in previous generations. This changed Rhydon's playstyle from one of a check to potential sweepers to one of a tank, used to check physical switches. Although not often used competitively, Rhydon with Eviolite gave players a new and surprising choice for their team. A bulky man who can lay out some support with Stealth Rocks, take a hit, and counter with its Stab Earthquake. Rhyperior, on the other hand, stuck to the status quo, at least when it came to this Pokemon in competitive play. It couldn't really tank as well as Eviolite Rhydon, so it was more restricted to a role we've seen it play in previous generations. Only now, it's resigned to the underused tier, as its speed and weaknesses left it super vulnerable to grass and water counters. People were still impressed and experimented with the bulkiness and huge attack of Rhyperior, but at the end of the day, it was really just too easy to counter. As Pokemon X and Y rolled around, we Rhydon and Rhyperior fans waited on the edge of our seats to discover whether or not our beloved drill Pokemon would get a Mega Evolution. Seems reasonable, right? It's a strong classic Pokemon from the original 150, perfect for a Mega, but it wasn't gonna happen. So in Generation 6, we were stuck with Rhyperior in a sea of Megas, just waiting to test the longevity of this Pokemon. As the metagame kinda revealed itself a little, we saw Pokemon like, unsurprisingly, Mega Charizard X, Mega Pinsir, and Talonflame getting a lot of face time in teams. They all provided amazing stats and decent typings to a team, but it also opened the door for Rhyperior to actually do something in the meta. With its high defense and rock ground typing, Rhyperior was the perfect counter for some of these commonly seen Pokemon. But that didn't mean Rhyperior completely smashed them either. Sure, it was a good check for those before mentioned potential sweepers, but again, its slow speed meant it was more dependent on hitting Pokemon off the switch. Even Pokemon like Mega Charizard X and Talonflame, who Rhyperior should counter, could really wreck this Pokemon with Will-O-Wisp. Since Rhyperior has no way of recovering HP, it can pretty easily be worn down. Still, Gen 6 was a slight improvement for Rhyperior in competitive play. There just happened to be a lot more stuff out there that it could counter, which gave it more reason to be used. However, we must end this video on the history of Rhydon and Rhyperior on a more sour note: Sun and Moon. As Rhydon and Rhyperior have seen ups and downs throughout the game's history, it seems in the current meta it's again on a downswing. All of its flaws from the previous games sort of bubble up to the surface in Sun and Moon. Sure, it's big enough to take a physical hit and lay down stealth rocks and maybe one hit a bad switch or inexperienced player, but the lingering curse of its speed and special defense can't be ignored in this meta. As a tank, it can set up stealth rocks and use toxic, but there's just way too many checks and counters out there that you'd be lucky to even get that off. Common water Pokemon sport 4 times effective stabs against Rhyperior. Slowbro, a very common sight in the meta, is but only one threat. Almost any bulky or wall Pokemon will also stop Rhyperior. Bronzong, Gligar, and Chestnut all shrug off its high attack stat and pretty much stack buffs while laughing. This is true for the rarely used tier at least. But outside of that, you'd find even less reason to play with Rhyperior. Eviolite Rhydon also sees virtually no use in Sun and Moon. Other more potent walls and tanks, who make better use of the defense and special defense boosts from that item, why would you have an Eviolite Rhydon when you could pick the more stable and better over-round Chansey, for example? Despite low defensive stats in general, its health and move pool make it a much more viable pick as a wall than compared to Rhydon. And that's pretty much where the drill Pokemon is at the moment. Years upon years of history, up and down the list of viable Pokemon in competitive play, Rhydon and Rhyperior have proven that with each meta that comes out, there's always a chance for them to break out as they did when they were first introduced. Maybe the days of the drill Pokemon are behind them, and faster Pokemon will keep them in lower tiers for the foreseeable future. But that won't stop die-hard fans from trying to eke out a place for this original Big Daddy. One day, maybe, their dedication will pay off. But for now, the reality is that Rhydon and Rhyperior are both relics of an older, simpler game in time. And one cannot simply roll over the meta as they once did in previous generations. Anyway guys, we hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you support the channel by liking, sharing, and of course subscribing for more videos in the future. As always, thanks so much for watching and we'll see you next time.